Well, hello once again. In this video, I want to visit the topic of the yellow brick road and how it pertains to the United States of America as we are today. But first, we're going to go through some of these things. We're going to go through what the author had intended, some of the conspiracy theories around that, and then we're going to make our way into the application of the yellow brick road as I've described in the description on the video feeds. And primarily, as I kind of mentioned in the description, that we are not the U.S. anymore, and we haven't been for some time. And I'm not necessarily talking location. I'm basically talking in spirit and in character, and that's basically what I'm going to get into. So let's take a look at the four characters, beginning with this whole thing. Let's take a look at the four characters that, there's more than just the four characters in the Wizard of Oz as it was produced, as it was written and then produced. And you have, obviously you have the dog, Toto, you have the wizard, you have Dorothy, and you have the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion, but you also have the Good Witch, the Bad Witch, and blah, 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 blah. Well, I'm going to focus on four primary characters in this particular thought process, and the first is going to be obviously Dorothy, and then her counterparts, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. But I'm going to take a look at the wizard a little bit as well. And we are going to kind of unpack this whole thing and make some application for ourselves as we are talking about the United States of America as it is today. Before we do that, I just want to get into a couple things. I want to share with you the my website. It is a work in progress, and it's timothysenterprises.com. And the reason why you might want to go there is at some point I'm going to take all of my notes and I'm going to turn it into articles, transcripts, and put it into the blog. As you see right there as one of the posts, are you a trend follower or a trend setter? That would be at timothysenterprises.com. That's the home page, the web page for this. And as you can see at the top of the menu, you have the about, the blog, contact form, some of the videos. I will post my videos that I do here, there, as well as vlogs, and as well as things on topics like photography, video, and studio work and field work and all that other stuff. Eventually there's going to be a photo gallery of my landscape pictures, and then a page on publishing. I'm working on a children's series of books, as well as coloring books and some theological Bible studies. And then finally you have the Timotheus store, which right now basically comprises of the Etsy store that I have, because I don't yet have a shopping cart in my webpage. But if you want to take a look at some of the products, the coffee mugs, the cutting boards, some cell phone holders, and puzzles and things like that I have my landscape photos on, just head on over there and take a look. So let's go ahead and get into this whole ordeal with the yellow brick road. That is, in fact, the Wizard of Oz. But the reason why I'm saying follow the yellow brick road is what we're going to do is we're going to follow Dorothy and her companions here, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion, and we're going to follow the yellow brick road and see where it has led and where it's leading. Knowing that Dorothy was lost. She got swept away from her home in a whirlwind, a tornado that was, and you and I both know that tornadoes are destructive, and she found herself in the land of the Munchkins. Well, You and I do not live in the land of the Munchkins, though some of us might be Munchkins. I'm going to contest that we live in the land of the Wizard, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion. We have wizards who think they know everything and don't know jack squat. We have people that are lost and don't know where to go. They follow the yellow brick road to the wizard, and they expect the wizard to fix everything, and I do mean everything, everything in their personal life, everything in the life of the nation, everything in the life of the world. And then you have people, and some of all of these are kind of intertied together, interconnected. Then you have people who are scarecrows, and they have no brain. You have the Tin Men who have no heart, and then we have lions who are toothless and have no courage. They have no spine. They are all bark and no bite. They're all growl and not much else. The Wizard of Oz was actually written by a man. His name was L. Braun. Let's see here. L. Frank Baum, actually. I mispronounced that. He published his book in the very early 1900s. And there are those who say that the Wizard of Oz represents the country, the land of the Munchkins represents the country, and that the wizard is an ordinary man who maintains power and influence and wields his manipulation and illusion on the land of the Munchkins. And they would say that at that time that was President William McKinley. He was the wizard in the Emerald City. The Emerald City had to do with a city driven by money, that is greenbacks. And of course, the wizard would be everything to everybody. Of course, we have doorkeepers, we have gatekeepers, we have good witches, bad witches, and tornadoes, whirlwinds, and all kinds of fear-mongering catastrophes at every turn. Here in the what I come up with one thing concerning the Emerald City. Some back then said the Emerald City represented Wall Street, greenback colored metaphor for Wall Street and DC, because the greenbacks were unsecured and basically useless. The spiritual meaning is a place where dreams and hopes can be fulfilled based on the money. However, according to L. Frank Baum's biographer, whose name was Littlefield, the Scarecrow was displaying a terrible sense of inferiority and self-doubt, representing the American farmer. However, looking into the author himself, he was actually, and he stated that he was drawing his inspiration of his books and the characters of his books from his life circumstances and the people around him in those circumstances of life that he found himself going through. In times of tragedy, he would write fictional parodies to those experiences, dedicated the books to those in which he portrayed. So at this point in time, what I would really want to do is just put our own spin on the Wizard of Oz and follow the yellow brick road and draw some parallels and come up with some answers to the national climate of our day, and particularly as it pertains to the United States of America. So I don't think that it would be any contest to say that, at least for now, we as a people in the United States of America actually do live in a whirlwind. We could even say that we live in a whirlwind after whirlwind after whirlwind, and it never seems to stop. And I would tell you that that is by design. If you remember the terminology, out of chaos, build order. And this has been actually done in cycles over the centuries and the decades. And these whirlwinds, you could say, are picking us up and transporting us to another land, another time and space, or even another dimension, if you will. And And this is where we're finding ourselves in today's day. Too many people, they decide that they want to or are looking for the wizards that we call our elected elite to fix everything, and yet we don't stop to look inward to ourselves, which is where Dorothy comes in, and the Scarecrow and the Tin Man and the Lion come in the fact that we're looking here at the actual Wizard of Oz, or following the yellow brick road. So let's take a moment and talk about the Scarecrow. If we take a look at the Scarecrow, and the Scarecrow has no brain, we know that he has no brain. Therefore, the Scarecrow cannot reason. He has no sense of right and wrong. He can't discern the difference between the two. He lacks direction, and he lacks purpose. He simply is an airhead. There's no possibility of logic. There's no cognitive thinking. There's no strategic thinking or anything that's worth thinking about in the mind of a brainless. He has no mind. Of course, we're going to see that with the Tin Man that's tied together, and that's why I said that in many cases we as a people are all of these characters combined. We're going to get into that in a little bit. We also know that we have been dealing with a Common Core education, a wokeness, if you will, for, I would say, a little over a decade. And that has a lot to do with where we are today as well. We're going to get into that in just a few minutes. I'm going to explain how that works, as well as the wokeness. And in the wokeness, we're relegated to the lowest common denominator of thinking, and that would pertain to Common Core education and thinking as well. The Common Core ideology, as I showed you in the Rebranding of America, actually comes out of the UN, and UNICEF is funded by Bill Gates and all those people. And if you follow the trail, and it leads right through the Department of Education, the Federal Department of Education, and right down into every common school that is a public school. Now, in this Common Core education, this Common Core world ideology, and this wokeness, the bottom line is that education from K through secondary schools that prescribe to this line of thinking and to this style of education are relegated to the lowest common denominator of thinking, the lowest common denominator of student in the classroom, in the university, and this will, in fact, lead us straight back into serfdom. It will produce slaves. It will produce mere slaves of the system, and that is the design. And many people, unfortunately, are content to be these serfs, a clog in the system, and it's tragic. I'm going to show you how this works. Excuse me, in any venue where information is put out for human consumption, to be absorbed, to be understood, and even to be acted upon, which that's what you do when you gain knowledge. You make adjustments and you act upon it. You shift your life. You base your life on information. You base your life on education. A person doesn't get a degree to not create some sort of a work habit and a lifestyle. So therefore, it just stands to reason, if you are not a scarecrow and you have half a brain, you will add those dots together and figure out that your thinking is going to create a baseline for your life. And that includes in the spiritual realm. Doctrine is very, very important. The doctrine that you believe is going to be the baseline and how you conduct your life from the moral compass that you create, or that is created within you, based on the information in the baseline, the doctrine that you bring in on a spiritual level. So when you come across this aspect of consuming information that's to be understood, to be absorbed, and to be acted upon, there are two main schools of thought to the approaches to how to disseminate information. The first approach is, in fact, the trickle-down theory. The trickle-down theory uh, is how this works is you understand that you're speaking to a variety of people, but you're going to speak in such a manner that you give generalities, but you also give details, you give important details, you give very important information. You portray complex thoughts and ideas in such a way to try to simplify it and make it understandable for everybody, knowing that not everybody is going to understand what you're talking about. What you're not doing with the trickle-down theory is you're not dumbing down your information. And we're going to get into the second ideology or aspect of disseminating information in the sense that you dumb it down. But with the trickle-down theory, you aim at those who really can comprehend what you're saying, knowing that there are those who cannot. You give your talk, your speech, your curriculum, your teaching, your message, your preaching. You give it so that those who have grown in aspects to be able to understand can continue to grow. And when, and you do so knowing that you're simply going to go over the heads of a certain aspect of those who are in your midst. But this does something for your people. This does something for those who are under your tutelage. This does something for those who are under your leadership. This does something for those, even those who do not understand you. This does something even for them. And it does three things. Number one, it causes growth. It causes growth on every level. It causes growth for those who are already learned and are seeking to learn more and to grow more and understand what you're saying, but are putting the dots together. They're adding to what they already know. And in so doing, they are growing. And they are then becoming the people that can then turn around and reach those who do not comprehend but want to grow. They become the teachers. They become the leaders. They become the mentors. They become the pastors. They become the professors. They become the experts. And they grow into these leadership roles and they help the other people up. And when they help the other people up, those people grow also. And therefore, everybody grows. And in doing this, everybody has something to reach up to rather than to be pushed down to. The trickle-down theory. Now, this does something else for the person who is at that point actually giving out the information, whether they're a teacher, a mentor, a professor, a pastor, or a leader. This also benefits the leader in the sense that they can go on to study and prepare other things to learn without having to worry about going to every individual and on every level relating to everybody and bringing everybody up. And so this unshackles the main leader to continue to develop his skills or her skills and to develop their thinking and to grow in their leadership as well while they're mentoring those who already comprehend and then create mentors out of those people, and therefore everybody under the trickle-down theory grows. Do you see how that works? This is not, let me repeat, this is not how Common Core education or ideology works. This is not how wokeness works. It is not. So if you can see how the trickle-down theory works, you can just imagine the theory of relating to the lowest common denominator, aka Common Core or wokeness. With the lowest common denominator theory, you aim at appealing to the very lowest of thinkers that you're speaking to. In other words, if you have an auditorium, if you have an audience of adults, older adults, including in a sociological sense, adults of various maturity, various expertise. You can say doctors, lawyers, engineers, scientists, medical people, police officers, teachers, professors, whatever it is. And you have all these people in the room, and they have a level of thinking where they can comprehend things, or they have the ability, if they don't comprehend, to add 2 plus 2 and get a general sense, and then go and know how to figure it out. If you have those people, then you have the younger adults who are less mature, may or may not have the same skill set and thinking, and you also have teenagers who are just moving into the adult arena, and they're on yet another level. And then you have young children who are on yet another level, and then you have infants on the other level. Can you imagine being in a college with or an auditorium or a church and having all these people sitting under you, and you speak to the lowest common denominator in front of you? You speak to the children, and you speak to the children who are of the lowest comprehension level. So we could go down to kindergarten or pre-K or whatever it is, and you have very either basic but yet important, or complex and important things to teach. It can be a very common general topic, or it can be a general topic that is actually starting to dig into and take deep dives into why it is what it is, and therefore you have to put on your thinking cap. Excuse me. So if you're doing this and you are reaching out to the lowest common denominator in your presence, this is going to do a few things as well, just like the trickle-down theory does. But it is not, in my humble opinion, is not going to do anything good. And here's why. Because number one, very quickly, you lose your people that think. You lose the people that can process thought, that can understand what you're saying. And if they don't understand what you're saying, by the time you're done, they understand what you're saying, or they know how to find out what you're saying, and they know how to add dots together. Add 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals 3, not anything you want it to be. Those people you're going to lose. You're going to lose it right off the top. And why is that? Because they're already there. You're not instructing them in anything. They are already there. They've been through it. They've been living it forever. They're not challenged. They're not learning at all. So you lose those people. When you lose those people, you have nobody to mentor everybody under them except the leader himself. And now you've caused undue burden on the person doing the actual teaching and supposed to be mentoring that very first number one person in front of them. Now they have to go down to the next level of cognitive thinking and start mentoring all of those individually. And they're way down here. Now not only are you unnecessarily shackling the leader to reach out to everybody, but now you're going to lose your leader. And you're losing your next line of mentors. You're losing your next line of leadership, and you're losing your next line of professors and pastors and so on and so forth. So because you lose those people, because you unnecessarily burden the leader, you diminish all forms of mentorship. You demean all forms of leadership, and therefore even the lowest level of people thinking really have nothing to reach up to, because the gap is so wide that it's going to take them years and years to understand where these other people already are. And if there is any upward growth, it's going to be menial and pretty much undetectable. So those are the two schools of thought as far as teaching and leading and things like that. Now, let me ask you this. Can you understand, just from that alone, can you understand where we are in this country? We've been dealing with Common Core education for over a decade. We've been dealing with this wokeness for over a decade, and actually longer than that. It actually goes back to leave no child or no child left behind. That's what that means. So all the way back to George Bush Jr., we've been dealing with the lowest common denominator type of mentality and the wokeness. They just weren't telling you what it was. And so here we are. Now, let's talk about this education for just a little bit. And this is where I give you, once I get the stuff on my website, this is where I give you where I'm getting my stuff. And let me tell you, you need to look this stuff up for yourself, because I'm not even scratching the surface. I'm giving you breadcrumbs. And I went and I looked, and I even looked at people I really don't care about. Not that I don't care about them. I don't care to be schooled by them. I don't necessarily follow them, and I'll tell you why right now. And that is because the first thing I'm going to share with you comes from NPR, National Public Radio, National Public Broadcasting. On June 21st of 23, they write that the average test scores for 13-year-olds dropped to its lowest level in decades. That would be reading and math scores. And they only went back to 2020. So even from 2000, we talked about George Bush Jr., but just from 2020 to 2023, they dropped exponentially. And it was extremely chartable and pronounced. They say even the math scores were more disappointing. On a scale of 500, the declining ranged from 6 to 8 points for middle and high-performing students and 12 to 14 points for low-performing students. Math results showed widening gaps based on gender and race. Scores decreased by 11 points for female students from the 2020 results, comparing with a 7-point decrease for male students. So the female students in math actually decreased more than the males. Then among black students, math scores declined 13 points, while white students had a 6-point drop. Compared with the 35-point gap between black and white students in 2020, the disparity widened 42 points. So they're saying for 2 decades and I said for over a decade, they're saying for 2 decades, the national math and reading scores are hitting a historic low. This comes from edweek.org, written October 24th of 2022. They put an interesting spin on this whole thing, and here's why. Because they are bringing it into 2020, from 2020, just like NPR did, and they're blaming it on something entirely different than what I mentioned, and that is Common Core education and wokeness. And here's what they have to say. The pandemic has smacked American students back to the last century in math and reading achievements, according to the test shown as the national, or known as the National Report Card. Results for students who took the test in spring of 22, the first main national assessment of education progress administration for those grades since the pandemic began, show the biggest drop in math performance in 4th to 8th grades since the testing program began in 1990. In reading, 4th and 8th graders likewise are performing on par with students in the 1990s, and about third students in both grades can't read even at the basic achievement level, the lowest level on the test. They can't even read the lowest level on the test. They want to blame it on the pandemic. Let me tell you something. At 4th grade, in 8th grade, if you're going to say at that level and they're in a pandemic, you're blaming it on the pandemic, I'm going to tell you, they couldn't read before the pandemic. You don't jump from K to 4 and K to 8 in 1 year when the pandemic hits, and you can't read at the most basic level and blame it on a pandemic. You can't do it. See, we have no brain. Like the scarecrow, we have no brain, no logic, no reasoning capabilities, no cognitive thinking. You're going to blame 4 years and 8 years of education on the beginning of a pandemic. This is what Common Core education and wokeness bring you. 20 years of it. People even doing the testing and the charting can't even think. It's no wonder that students can't do reading and do math. Our country has lost its brain. Bunch of scarecrows running around. Folks, that's not hard to see. I mean, are you tracking? Do you understand that logic? Do I need to repeat myself? We talk about 2 decades of testing. We talk about 4th graders who are kindergarten, 1st grade, 2nd grade, 3rd grade. They're in their 5th grade. Then you talk about 4th grade, 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade. 9 years of education, and they can't read at the basic level. But in 2020, we're going to blame 5 years of education and 9 years of education on a pandemic. No, sir. No, ma'am. That is, let's go back. Let's go back to those 2 thoughts on putting out information, the trickle-down theory and the lowest common denominator theory. Now, what do you think has been at work for over 2 decades? For over 2 decades. Let me tell you again, the lowest common denominator theory called Common Core education. Let me find another one. I also include a link just for your report for your own reading. I'm not going to talk about it here. And I do want to mention, though, that I've already showed you that this Common Core technology comes from the UN. In the video, The Rebranding of America, or The Rebranding of the USA, that the entire educational structure in the United States has been disseminated from the UN, and that the UN literally got it from the Chinese. Now, do you think the Chinese are using it? No. They put it out for the rest of the world to consume. They're not going to use it. They're going to let you sink into disparity and into the Scarecrow, well, they become the wizards. And I'll tell you that this, coming from the UN, is sponsored and channeled through UNESCO or UNICEF. And it is funded by Bill Gates. Now, this reminds me, folks, of something very important to remember. And that is Romans 1:22. And understand, I'm taking this, this is not the context of the passage, but it does apply. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. Now, in that verse and in that context, all of the other garbage that they are pushing is in the context of Romans 1:22, starting way up in verse 18. And you can just go read it and make the applications. Now, when it comes to Common Core, dissemination in the lowest common denominator, you're going to find out real soon that the elites are going to mentor themselves and grow the world the way they want it, and then from there go put out the lowest common denominator theory for everybody else. Why? So that they plug into menial, low thinking or no thinking tasks that serve the elite. And the education system as it stands right now is built to do exactly that. If you are in certain fields or whatever, they are filling whatever roles they want or deem necessary to be filled based on the education that they're putting out through the UN and UNESCO and UNICEF. So we have taken a look at the Scarecrow. We have taken a look at the theories of education and Common Core and all that. Let's take a look at the Scarecrow. We did take a look. I'm sorry. We took a look at the Scarecrow, who has no brain. Now let's take a look at the Tin Man, who has no heart. Now understand this. The heart or the soul is where the motives originate. It is where passions and empathy comes from. It is where the direction of life comes from. It is where action comes from. Let's explain that. Let's break that down. Let's go ahead and take a look at it. And for this, we are going to base this on a biblical worldview. You can follow it, you don't have to, but I think that you will find, if you just stop and think about it, you're going to find that these things ring true across the board, whether you want to prescribe to them or not. So we're going to take a look at the Tin Man. Before we do, I want to share with you a couple of things. And so just by way of non-sponsorship type of sponsorship, I think you would be well served and well suited to visit Battle for Freedom. Now, Battle for Freedom is on Rumble, Battle for Freedom, on Facebook, and it is our good buddy here, Watson Prunier. He is the dude behind Battle for Freedom. He also has this webpage here, watsonprunier.com, where he covers biblical thoughts and studies and faith and different things coming from his personal studies and whatnot. But you also have Battle for Freedom. And on battleforfreedom.com, he has a list of all of his shows, all of his articles, and also here a link to his books that he has authored and written and published, as well as other things. And so I think that you would be well served to go ahead and visit Watson Prunier on battleforfreedom.com and watsonprunier.com if you want to get commentary from a biblical worldview. I will tell you that Watson might just be the next Rush Limbaugh. I don't know. He's pretty good at what he does, and he has a very good basis for his worldview. And then I would like to encourage you to look up this young lady. She's not necessarily a Christian, I don't believe, but she likes to tackle things that most people won't touch because they'll either get canned or whatever. But she is going after a lot of untouchable stuff. Very bright young lady. She's at the Unlimited Hangout and also at the mintpressnews.com. Thank you, Luke, for that affirmation. I appreciate it. So, Whitney has tackled things like what Epstein was involved in. She's tackled BlackRock. She's tackled Bitcoin. She's tackled the UN. She's tackled a lot of things. She's tackled the 9/11 story as it contradicts the official narrative. She is a journalistic hawk, and I highly recommend you go and see what she comes up with, because she really goes after it. And here's one more example. Exposing the real power behind the Jeffrey Epstein sexual blackmail network. She has tore that bad boy up. So, having said all that, let's get back into the video at hand and start digging into the Tin Man. As you all know, the Tin Man has no heart. The Tin Man has no heart. And as I said, the heart or soul, in the Bible, it shows that the heart and the soul is basically seen as the same thing, is where motives originate. It is where passion and empathy come from. It is where the direction of life comes from, and it is where the actions of your life come from. Now let's get into some scripture, and this is how this plays out. I got to get my cues up here. Proverbs 23:7. For as a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So if you think in your heart one way versus another, that is the direction your life is going to take. And it's all step by step. First step, second step, little step, baby step, bigger stride, jogging, trotting, sprinting, whatever it is. So if you don't have a brain and you don't have a heart, you cannot, and you cannot, and even if you don't have a spine, you cannot, you will not, you do not take a stand for what is right. And the word righteous comes from, or the word right comes from the word righteous. It means altogether right. But if you don't have a brain and you don't have a heart and you can't discern right from wrong, your life is not built on cognitive thinking. It is directionless, it is purposeless, and you don't have a heart, you're going to you're going to lose motivation, and you're going to tuck tail, and you're going to run. Let's take a look at some of the ways that evil thinking affects an individual. Let's just take a good little look here. Let's take a look at these examples of evil and wrong. In Genesis 27:41, Esau hated his brother Jacob because of the blessings wherewith his father blessed him, and Esau said in his heart. Esau said from the seat of his thinking, from his motives, from his center of his being, he said, the days of mourning for my father are at hand, and then I will slay my brother. Now we're talking about not being able to take a stand. We're talking about not having any discernment between right and wrong. We're talking about not being able to think either spiritually, logically, or any of the above. Fear of man, what they say, what they might do, and focusing on man rather than Christ comes from the heart. And we see this with King David as he focused on another man who was a king and not on God. 1 Samuel 21:12 says, and David laid up these words in his heart and was sore afraid of Achish, the king of Gath. Now, Scripture tells us that God will keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. We are told to fix our eyes on Christ, who for the joy set before him and endured the cross and despised the shame, is now seated down at the right hand of God, and throw off every weight and sin that encumbers you, and run the race that is set before you. You cannot do that if you don't have any thinking or if you don't have a heart, and you're not thinking or processing or motivated to please God. And that is where we are in this country. There is a focus on everything except what God has laid out for man. Let's continue on. Selfishness comes out of the seat of the heart. That is the soul, where motives come from, the direction of life comes from. We see this selfishness and jealousy in Esther 6:6 with Haman. Haman said, he came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delights to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart, think about that, Haman thought in his heart, to whom would the king delight to honor more than me? So right here we see that jealousy and selfishness come from within the heart. Let me tell you, there is absolutely nothing in this world that will generate, outside of yourself, that will generate selfishness. That's why it's called selfishness and jealousy. That comes straight from us, you and me. That comes from right here. That comes from our seat of thinking. That comes from the soul. That comes from the unregenerated man. That comes from the unsaved fleshly heart. That comes from a heart who is not fixed on what is right. It is a heart that is fixed on what it wants. And we see this with Haman in Esther 6:6. Foolishness and disbelief in God also come from the heart. Psalms 14:1. The fool has said in his heart, there is no God. They are all corrupt, and they have done abominable things. There is none that doeth good. Foolishness and disbelief in abominable works, nothing good, also comes from the heart. Now, I'm going to share with you a couple of other verses, and I've got these tied up between Psalms 14:1 that I just showed you, and Psalm 10 and Psalm 12. Let me just read Psalm 10, 3 and 4 and 5, and then go to Psalm 12. In Psalm 10, verse 3, it says, "For the wicked boast of his heart's desire." Sounds like Haman. Sounds like what David just wrote. Well, we're seeing this now. "And the greedy man curses and spurns the Lord. The wicked, in the haughtiness of his countenance, does not seek him," that is God. "And all his thoughts are, there is no God." So when you're not focusing on and desiring to please God and to do what is right based on what He calls right and wrong, these are the things that come out of the heart. And it's just natural. The heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it? Psalm 12, beginning in verse 1 and going down to verse 4. "Help, Lord, for the godly man ceases to be. For the faithful disappear from among the sons of men. They speak falsehood to one another. With flattering lips and with a double heart they speak. May the Lord cut off all of the flattering lips. And the tongue speaks great things. Who have said with our tongue, we will prevail. Our lips are our own. Who is Lord over us?" So from the heart, not only do these things come, but also a turning away from God and becoming a God unto ourselves. I think that if you think that through, in fact, I'm positive, 100% positive, whether you want to prescribe to these things or not, if you think that through, you will find it to be true. And what you will do is your heart will pander after all of your own desires, whether they are right or wrong or anything, and it has nothing to do with what's right or wrong. It simply is what you want. And we'll skip that one. How about deception? Psalms 55:21. "The words of his mouth were smoother than butter, but war was in his heart." So he said one thing, but in his heart was completely different. "His words were softer than oil, yet they were drawing swords." As well as mischief and discord. Proverbs 16:4. "Forwardness is in the heart. He deviseth mischief continually, and soweth discord." So all of these things, apart from God, come out of the heart of man. Now, I mentioned that I mentioned the theories of disseminating information for the sake of education, the theory of trickle-down theory, and also the lowest common denominator. And now I want to share with you another theory, and that is called thesis and antithesis. I was going to say antithesis, but that is not how you pronounce it. Antithesis. So what antithesis says is that for every thought or argument or theory, there is an opposite. If you have a positive battery post, and the battery is going to work, you have to have a negative. If there's right, how do you know right or wrong? If there's right, there's wrong, and if there's wrong, there's right. You got antithesis and antithesis. So let's take a look at some of the things that come out of the heart that are good. We showed you what comes out that can be evil. Let's take a look at what is the possibilities of being good when a person's mind is stayed on the Lord. So how about a solid footing for life? Psalm 37:31. "The law of his God is in his heart, and none of his steps shall slide." So when you focus on what is right based on what God says, your foot will not slip. You will have clear direction. You will have solid footing. And while you may be assailed and attacked or tempted, your foot will not slip. How about all that is upright and good? And when God is in it and it comes out of the heart, that it does come out of the heart when God is in it, all that is upright and good. Psalm 15:2. He that walketh upright and worketh righteousness and speaks the truth in his heart. Seeking God in your heart is also good and comes from your heart when you seek the Lord, not from you yourself, but when God is doing a work in you, he gives you the capacity to seek him. And then you go back to those other verses that I gave you, and we know, because the heart, in and of ourselves, the heart is desperately wicked, and who can know it? So seeking God, for thou, O my God, hast told thy servant that thou wilt build him a house. Therefore thy servant has found in his heart to pray before thee. So this individual, before moving in a direction, sought God from the inside out. Not just to get what he wanted, but he wanted God's will to be done in the direction of his life. Psalm 37:31. The law of God is in his heart, and none of his steps shall slide. Already read that. Joshua 7. Now, let's take a look at Joshua 7. In Joshua 7, we see that the actions that come from the heart actually have a result. In other words, there are actions and then there are consequences. And we're going to see in Joshua chapter 7 this being played out. So in Joshua chapter 7, and we also see the fix. In Joshua chapter 7, beginning in verse 1, but the children of Israel committed a trespass in the accursed thing. That is, God said, do not do this. Somebody did this. Antithesis, antithesis. Tongue-tied. For the son of Carmi, the son of Zabdi, the son of Zerah, the son of Judah, the son of the took of the accursed thing, and the anger of the Lord was kindled against the children of Israel. And Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, which is beside Bethaven. Kind of funny we're reading this, and artificial intelligence in the world is taken off like wildfire. Just a thought. Joshua sent men from Jericho to Ai, and they just got done defeating Jericho, and they did exactly what God told them to do, so they defeated Jericho, which is beside Bethaven, and on the east side of Bethel, and spake unto them, saying, go up and view the country. And the men went up and viewed Ai. Artificial intelligence. And they returned to Joshua and said to him, let not all the people go up, but let about 2,000 or 3,000 men go up and smite Ai. And make not all the people labor, for they are but a few. They went up based on bad information. Well, they're going to go up based on bad information. And this is not information. Well, let's say this. Let's go on, and then we'll come back to this. We'll come back. So in verse 4 of Joshua 7, it says, so there went up of the people about 3,000 men, and they fled before the men of Ai. And the men of Ai smote them, about 36 men, and they chased them from before the gate even unto Shebarim, and smote them in the going down. Therefore the hearts, now watch this, the hearts of the people melted and became as water. So when Israel disobeyed God and was not concerned about following God, they went up, but they didn't have the courage to do what needed to be done. Not only did they not do what needed to be done, they couldn't even stand their own ground. They tucked tail, they turned, and they ran, and they got their rear ends handed to them. And because they had sin in the camp, their hearts melted before the people and became as water. Now, if we think that we as a people cannot go through the same thing, and I believe we are right now, If we think that the same thing won't happen to us, then we are completely and utterly foolish. We're full of pride and arrogance if we think that it cannot and will not happen to us when we literally walk away from God. Now, I understand there have been elements in this country since its inception that has been anything but godly. And I'm talking about leadership. I'm talking about from the very beginning, there has been this element, just like there's been from the beginning of time. There's been this element that has been anti-God, therefore anti-Christ, and it has sought for the duration of this country to turn it upside down for somebody other than God himself. But we as a people, at the very least, recognize who God was. I'm sorry, back then, recognize who God is. We did recognize who God is. That's better grammar. And we did operate in our own lives on certain levels in a godly fashion. And I'm not saying it was perfect, and I'm not saying that it was, like it was anything to write home about. But when you have attacks on that which is biblical coming from the top and the bottom, then you see it won't be long, and our hearts we're going to run into conflict, and our hearts are going to melt and turn as water. If you think that can't happen in this country, all you got to do is see here that it happened because just a small few people committed sin before God, and they did so knowing better. Romans 1 says, even the natural man that does do what is right has a sense of who God is, even though he doesn't necessarily believe. He knows that God exists, and in his own life creates a moral code based on what is right and wrong, and therefore benefits from that particular seed of life. So if you ask me, it's pretty obvious where we are in this country. I think that if you take a look at not only the wokeness, but the deviation, the deviance in the perversion and the greed and the pride and all these things that are in our midst, we are in a place where it won't be long and our hearts will melt and become as water. And you can also see how the scarecrow with no brain and the tin man with no heart are basically just three aspects of the same person, or two aspects of the same person, or two aspects of the same society, or two aspects of the same country, nation, kingdom. This brings us to the lion who has no courage and no spine. Courage would equal spine. If you don't have courage and you don't have spine, you don't have the ability to take a stand. You don't have the ability to hold ground. You don't have the ability to stand in confidence and say, I'm not doing that, or I will do that. You can do whatever you want to do. I'm going to do what is right. You can follow your selfish leading. You can follow your desires. I'm going to follow God's. You can do that over there. I'm going to do this. Or I'm not going to do that over there because it's not right. Or that's not the best option. If you don't have a brain, you don't have a heart, and you don't have a spine, you can't hold your ground. Now, let me just throw a sidebar in here, and this is not something that I have down in here, but I want to throw a sidebar in here. We have a lot of talk, it comes from the psychological realm, a lot of talk about positive and negative. Nowhere in Scripture do you see the terms think positive or think negative. Nowhere in Scripture do you see where you settle for, and I'm not talking positive or negative battery posts, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm getting at is in the realm of life, you have that which you don't want to be involved in. You have that which is okay. You have that which is tolerable, that which is okay, that which is semi-okay, that which is good, and then that which is great, and that which is the best. If you don't come from the right biblical seat, and this is what I mean, there's no positive and no negative in the Bible. If you don't come from the right seat, you will settle for what is second. You will settle for the path of least resistance. You will not know, you will not be able to discern right from wrong. You will not be able to cognitively think. You will not have any logic or biblical logic to speak of to actually take a stand. You will not have the motive. You will not have the direction. You will not have the empathy for what is right, and you will not have the empathy for those who you need to help up or protect, and you will not have the courage or the strength, the inner strength or the wherewithal to do what needs to be done, which is righteous. And you will, by definition and by default, settle for the lowest common denominator. And we always say, well, I did, that's good. Or that's okay. We're all guilty of it. So you know, me included. And I try to do my very best. I try to be my very best. I try to yield myself to be an instrument of righteousness, not positive thinking, and be what God wants me to be according to His will and not my own selfishness, and therefore leave that which is good, which is okay, and all that stuff behind, and settle for God's best. You see what I'm saying? But like the scarecrow and the Tin Man and the lion, if you're not in God, that ain't going to happen. If you're not in Christ, let me be specific. If you're not in Christ, you will settle for the path of least resistance. Because if you do anything else than that, you will find that you will lack courage and your heart will melt and become as water. Now, I know there are those who, I face death and this and that and the other thing. But there's more to life than life and death. Read Romans 13. So, God expects us to take on responsibility, to be yielded to Him, to be able to take on responsibility, to be instruments of righteousness. He gives us that responsibility. You can't get around it. We look at Ephesians chapter 6, and we see this principle at play here when we read in verse 10, finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord. Be strong in the Lord, in the power of His might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And I'm not getting into all of this nuances and unpacking all this right now. I'm simply going to show you something. For we wrestle not. Where are we? There we go. For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the principalities and powers, against rulers of darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Now, I've already explained in some of my videos the difference between the kingdom of heaven, the kingdom of the world, and the kingdoms of the earth. Here in Ephesians 6, it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood. That would be ourselves. We often take this verse as we are wrestling against our own selves, and that's not what it is saying. It also doesn't say we wrestle against the earthly kingdoms. That's not what it says. Excuse me, read it again. Against powers, against rulers of darkness of this world. When Satan was taken, when Jesus was up on the mountain in Matthew chapter 4, and Satan said, bow to me and I will give you the kingdoms of the world. If you take the kingdoms of the world, then in the unseen area of the realms of life, then you will, by default, affect and persuade the kingdoms of the earth. And that's what Satan was getting at. Just worship me and everything else falls into place for you. And Jesus said, you will worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve. So that's what Ephesians 6 is talking about. Those areas, when Satan was showing Jesus the kingdoms of the world, it had nothing to do with as far as the eye could see from peak to peak. Nothing at all. Against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore take on you the whole armor of God, that you may be able to stand against the evil day. Stand in the evil day, and having done all, to stand. God says we are responsible to take stands. Let me say this. In this day and age, it is very difficult to find anybody to truly take a stand. And that is the problem we have in this country. We have no brains, no hearts, and no spine. And here I'm laying out why. In the passage that I read you in Psalms and Proverbs, and in here, you go to Romans chapter 1 and see what happens there. And the only way to truly take a stand, is to be in Christ and be available to his power. Because in and of ourselves, we are useless. We do not have the power in and of ourselves, but we have the responsibility to rest in his power. And we have the responsibility to take stands. Above all, take in the shield of faith, whereas you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked, and the helmet of salvation, the sword of the Spirit, which is the word of God, praying always with all prayer and supplications in the Spirit, not what you want, but in the Spirit. That is, not from a seat of flesh, not from a seat of wickedness, but from the Spirit. And watching thereunto with all perseverance and supplication for all saints. You see, all these three characters represent different characteristics, to me anyways, of the same person, the same society, the same country. So let's ask this question: why are the reasons a person or country should lose heart? Why do we lose the ability to think clearly? Why do we ultimately lack courage? Why do we have no spine? And what are the possible outcomes of these traits or lack of these traits? And for that, you go to Romans chapter 1. And what did God say about that there? He says that man pandered after everything from his own heart, and therefore God gave them up to the lust of their hearts, to impurity, that their bodies might be dishonored among them. For they exchanged the truth of God for a lie, worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. There's your answer. So we took a look at following the yellow brick road, and where does it lead? We have no brain to think, we have no courage, we have no spine. And therefore, this is affecting all of our society. Now, I'll skip all this. And go here. So we've looked at the scarecrow, we've looked at the Tin Man, we are going through the lion. The lion we see has no courage, no spine, therefore his roar is bigger than its bite. And as a country, on all levels, our talk is big, even on the street. And every time the line is drawn in the sand, we move that line in the sand. Folks, we have had line after line after line drawn in the sand in this country, and every time it's moved. Why? Because we don't think straight. Because our hearts don't want to deal with the responsibilities that we have as a people, as a republic, as a republic that is supposed to be represented by and for the people based on the Word of God. And we lose heart because we don't want to take the responsibility, and we don't want to take a stand, and we can't take a stand. And so therefore, every time the line is drawn in the sand and we are pushed, we simply go, oh, that doesn't pertain to me, and we move the line in the sand. We're all guilty. And as a country, we start wars, we start fights, we start scrimmages that we don't win. Number one, we shouldn't be starting them to begin with. We should be here at home taking a stand for what is right here and not thinking that we can pull the sliver out of everybody else's eye when we still have the tree trunk, the telephone pole in our own eyes. That is also a biblical contradiction there. And Jesus told us, don't think you can do that when you got a pole in your own eye. And as a country right now, we have the pole in our eye. Our leadership talks big, but they can't win a war. They haven't won a war since World War II. They're not even supposed to, and our Pentagon isn't even supposed to declare wars. That's supposed to be an act of Congress. But act of Congress, they don't even represent the people anymore. And they've actually asked the Pentagon why they do this, and the Pentagon told them to go pound sand, and they did nothing about it. 2010, look it up. Panetta gets grilled, and he told them, we take our orders from the UN and from NATO. When you have a need to know, we'll let you know. And that's all backwards. Why are the rights of the people in this country being infringed? And people talk big. I hear people talk big on the street all day long. And yet tyranny marches on. Oh, Trump is going to fix it, but tyranny marches on. There are pockets of efforts from time to time and here and there, but tyranny marches on. Why is that? Why do we have recruitment down in our military? Why is enlistment down? Why are the numbers steadily dropping? And now, why did the Army just say they're going to axe 24,000 jobs? I'll tell you why. Because they can't find people to fill them. Because nobody has the guts to take a stand for what is right. Therefore, they don't have the guts to actually fight a fight that is right. Enlistment numbers have steadily dropped for the past 40 years. This is from usafacts.com. For more than 148,318 people enlisted in the U.S. Armed Forces in 2020, a 59% decline from 1980. Military enlistment has declined in recent decades. The Department of Defense, or DoD, says that it faces unprecedented recruiting challenges, as 77% of young adults in the U.S. are unqualified to serve. By the way, here comes that Common Core and wokeness crap. At the end of 2023 fiscal year, September, 3 branches reported falling short of their recruitment goals. The Navy was at 80% of its target number, the Army at 77%, and the Air Force at 89%. The Marine Corps and Space Forces were the only branches to meet their requirement goals. But then you have some other sources saying even that isn't true. The total number of active duty service members in the U.S. Armed Forces declined roughly 6% from 2012 to 2022, from 1.4 million to 1.3 million. So how much has the military enlistment dropped? 58% decline. Amid the recruiting woes, active duty end strength to drop again in 2024. So even in 2024, the projections are that it's not going to get better, it's going to get worse. So what does the military do? They just say, well, if we're not going to get them, we're not going to have those jobs. Number one. Number two, if we're not going to get them, we are going to relax the requirements. But there's even more contradiction. Written December 14th of 2023 in militarytimes.com, it says this, and that was Leo Shane Leo, whatever his name is. The smallest U.S. military force in more than 80 years is about to get even smaller. Under the end strength levels outlined in the annual defense authorization bill passed by Senate Wednesday evening and expected to be passed by the House on Thursday, the total number of active duty troops in the armed forces will drop to 1,284,500 in fiscal year of 2024. That's down nearly 64,000 personnel in the last 3 years, and the smallest total of Americans' military since 1940. And yet we want to start wars in Ukraine, we want to start wars in Iraq, we want to start wars with Russia, and we want to start wars with China. Are they out of their minds? They can't think. They're scarecrows. And when they do, they tuck tail and run. And they leave $9.8 billion worth of equipment in lands that are unforsaken, such as Afghanistan. Just ask Biden what he did. Lawmakers say that the reason for lower target isn't a decrease in missions or threat. No kidding. In recent years, but in the numbers, it reflects recruiting challenges across services and an expectation of what level of personnel is realistically coming up in months. Despite bipartisan support for the authorization bill calling for a reduced force size, several lawmakers say they are worried that the reduction is already putting the country at risk. No kidding. But even if you had them, we've lost our mind, we've lost our heart, and we've lost our spine. So to be frankly honest, it might be a good thing because we're just going to lose more people when we get our rear ends handed to us. We're going to lose less people, rather. This guy, Roger Wicker from Mississippi, says we need a larger force in every branch. But yet they're going to reduce the funding. And they're going to choke the stupid wokeness and Common Core ideology down their throats before they get to the military, so they're not even qualified to serve. The list goes on and on and on. I've got here one article from the Air Force Times, February 16, 2023. 2024, rather. The Pentagon ended fiscal year 23 on a sour note for military recruiting, falling tens of thousands of enlisted troops short of its goal in what it is called the toughest recruitment year for the military service since its inception of an all-voluntary force. That would be coming out of Vietnam. But efforts to spruce up the lackluster recruiting across the armed forces have yielded mixed results so far. America's two largest armed forces, however, are still struggling to woo prospective troops. The Army brought in almost 6,100 new soldiers between October 1st and December of 2023, falling short at 74% of its first quarter goals, according to the DoD. Navy fared worse, 5,400 sailors, or 65% of its own target. Still, Army recruiters are outpacing their performance at the same time last year, and reaching just 68% of their active duty goals. It goes on to talk about Space Force. And then it talks about numbers being down, and then actually lowering the standards for qualifying for the military. It's just ridiculous. Now, on the last note, I highly recommend you take a look at the Heritage Foundation's article from February 15, 2024 that Dakota Wood wrote. And I'm going to read some of this to you because he strikes a chord and he makes sense. One guy that has a brain, has a heart, and has a spine. He's actually putting it out there. Our government is not serious about defending the United States and its interests. That would be you and me and our children and our grandchildren and our children to come. In fact, it has fallen woefully short in carrying out its sacred obligation. I know that sounds harsh, but as we see, the government's own numbers prove this point. That our military is weak and not an indictment is not an indictment of men and women who have volunteered to serve. It's an indictment of a system largely defined by those elected to high office. Kaboom. But I'm going to say it is also reflected of us who elected people to high office and won't kick them out. It also includes senior military officers whose primary obligation should be to ensure our men and women have what they need to win a war, which is, after all, the primary purpose of the military. Yes, many people will say that the purpose of a strong military is to deter war, but deterrence derives from the belief of the enemy that they would be defeated in battle. So our military is at great risk of not being able to win. Well, it doesn't have much deterrent value. I would concur. Our potential enemies can see this, and the American public not so much. I would also concur because we have no brain and we have no heart. And we have no spine. Or we would kick out the people we elect into office. Literally. We wouldn't wait for an election cycle. We would say, you're out of there. At present, the U.S. military is roughly half the size it needs to be. Moreover, most of its primary equipment, ships, tanks, is 30 to 40 years old. And soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines, and guardians are training only a fraction of what they should to be competent in battle. Yet senior leaders in the Pentagon, White House spokesmen, and even members of Congress who have access to the facts and who should know better continue to say we have the best military in the world. And if saying so makes it so. And then Dakota says, it does not. He is right. Even the Pentagon says that they're woefully lacking. So, as we draw this particular video and topic to a close, what must be done? Well, I'm not going to answer that. I kind of answered that by proxy by going through some of these things. By default, the questions answer themselves. But specifically, I'm not going to answer these questions in this video. That is what the next two videos are going to comprise of, and that is fixing the problem when we take a look at mirror, mirror on the wall. And the video after that, number 4, one nation under who? Yeah, those are the next two videos. It's going to be a while because I'm going to be out of the studio for a little bit. But those are the next two videos in this series. We're going to tackle what must be done. Next video, mirror, mirror. And then the one after that, one nation under who? So with that, I thank you. If you've followed me up to this point, I thank you for sticking it out, and I hope that I have given you something to think about. And I simply ask that you take my videos on YouTube and Rumble and like and subscribe and share them. And of course, I will see you in the next video. Thank you, and God bless.